This week on Off the Air, Michael Yam.
Joining us on this edition of the Off the Air podcast is a new member of the team over at NFL Network, also a WFUV Sports alum. It's Mike Yam. Mike, thanks for being with us.
Awesome to be with you guys. Anytime I hear Fordham or WFUV, like I perk up, I flash back to the good old days. So it's a pleasure to be with you guys, and I appreciate the invite.
So, Mike, you went from the Pac-12 Network to NFL Network this year, and it's been a crazy year for so many people. Your journey, no different. What have the last few months been like in your mind?
To be honest with you, you're right. Like I try to have better perspective and not just think about what's been happening in my life, because this has been a lot of people. I mean, it was tough. I was given a heads up back in April that after basically, almost 9 years at Pac-12 Network, that my contract wasn't going to get renewed, and it was financial reasons. And, I was surprised that actually happened, to be honest with you. I didn't anticipate it, but as the COVID situation has sort of unfolded, you see all these networks that have been struggling financially. And it's not just our industry, and you guys know this. I mean, there's at the peak, I guess it was like almost 40 million people in our country that were dealing with unemployment. So it was nerve-wracking. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't lean in on relationships and friendships that I made when I was at Fordham, in different spots along the way. And I think that was the one really telling thing about the last few months for me is, one, a lot of people are willing to help, and two, relationships, they really matter. And I was extremely fortunate to find a spot at NFL Network. A lot of it was because of my time at ESPN. And, I've been freelancing as well with SiriusXM radio, which was oddly enough kind of my first job out of college, my first real job out of college when I left Fordham. And I've been doing some really cool things with Intel Sports on a new project called TrueView, which if you're watching NFL games, you see sort of like a unique camera looks, 360 cameras. So been doing stuff with those guys, and that's been great. And, you're just trying to stay busy in a wild time.
Mike, you talked about perspective and leaning people you care about the most during this process. What would you say is the biggest thing you learned about yourself going through all of this? Because obviously, like you mentioned, it's such a difficult time for you and for everyone. What's the biggest thing that you thought that you found out about yourself that you may not have known before the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually haven't really thought about that aspect of the last 9 months or so, because it's just not normal, right? Like I went through a situation where I didn't anticipate leaving a network that I was at when it launched back in 2012. I was comfortable and I liked my lifestyle in San Francisco, and that gets pulled, the rug gets pulled out from under you. And that's hard, man. Like that is not an easy situation. I'd be lying if I told you guys, hey, it was great. I my contract was up in August, and, next thing I know, a couple of weeks later, I'm at NFL Network. You take the 50,000 foot view of it, and I guess in some ways, like that is kind of what happened, but it's a struggle, man. It was tough. The anxiety that's associated with it, the ups and downs, the uncertainty. I mean, there's still uncertainty right now. I don't know where I'm going to be living. My lease is up in January. I don't even know if I'm going to be in San Francisco. So, and there's a lot of life stuff that pops up. I didn't think, and maybe the answer to your question is I'm trying to buy some time to figure out what I've actually learned about myself. But maybe the one thing that really stands out is this ability that I didn't know that I had to at least take a step back and be okay with the unknown. When I was at Fordham, guys, I got to campus and I thought I was pre-med. I was convinced I was going to be a pediatrician. That was my goal in life, and ended up, clearly it didn't work out for me in that avenue. But I've always been sort of a control freak and needing to know what's next. And the unknown has never been a comfortable situation for me. So I think the one thing that I've learned is maybe have a better outlook and just sort of kind of relax here. I mean, it's been tough, and I've been freaking out at times, about a lot of those uncertainties that I know are still ahead. But I think over the last couple of weeks or so, last couple of months, I've just sort of said to myself, you know what, like this is what it is. I can't control it. And I'm just going to try to worry about the things that I can control, which is the cheesiest line ever. It's the worst thing that anyone ever tells you. And you guys are on campus. You're going to be looking for an on-air job pretty soon after you graduate. And, you'll hear everyone will say, oh, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. And I wanted to like pull my hair out when I heard stuff like that, but there's a lot of truth to it.
Mike, you led us right into your time at Fordham. You graduated back in 2003, and you mentioned when you got to campus, it wasn't one of those situations where you came to campus knowing exactly that you were going to be a sports broadcaster. When did that hit you? When was that snap moment like, hey, this is what I want to do?
You know, it's first of all, 2003. My God, I mean, we're on Zoom doing this, and I can see more white hair, the salt that's kind of creeping up in that pepper, and that's bothersome. But I miss it. And I can't believe it's been that long since I graduated college. It feels like yesterday. I was on Arthur Avenue, living in Arthur House, and having pizza for breakfast on my way to FMH and taking some classes over there. But you know, I don't really know if there was like this light bulb moment before I got to Fordham, Emmanuel. Like I wanted to be a pediatrician, but there was always this kind of like this bug in the back of my head where media was somewhat interesting to me. And now there's, you turn on CNN, you see Sanjay Gupta on television. But when I was growing up, and you guys obviously are in Long Island, so you watch WNBC and WABC, and they would have doctors that would do segments on the news, and I just felt like, hey, if this works out for me, and I go to medical school and I become a doctor, maybe that is something that I could do sort of on the side, because there was an interest in it. And I'll never forget, I was in Alumni Court South. Does that dorm still exist, by the way, on campus?
Yeah, I lived there my freshman year.
You did? Okay, I'm sorry about that. Especially in the summer. It was crazy because I had the Mets my junior year that summer, and I don't know if you guys have stayed on campus at all during the summer, but they had us in South. No air conditioning. I remember I would sleep with a box fan right next to the bed on top of a chair. And that was the only way to cool off. Like I'd get home from Shea Stadium at the time and head to South, and there would be a crowd of people outside of South at that point because it was cooler outside in the summer than it was in the dorms. But let me get back on track here. And what was the initial question? Sorry, I got caught down this rabbit hole.
Oh, that flashball moment or lack thereof.
Oh, yeah. No, so I was in South my freshman year, and one of my guys on my floor, one of my buddies, he's dressed up in a suit and he's leaving. And I'm thinking to myself, like, what are you doing? It's like whatever time it was in the evening. And he said, oh, I'm going to go cover the Nets. Like, what the hell does that even mean? You're going to go and cover the Nets? And he said, oh, I joined the radio station. We have media credentials, and I have a car, so they're going to let me cover the Nets. And I was like, oh my God, that's kind of cool. Fast forward, the situation with the pre-med thing didn't exactly work out for me. I loved bio. The chemistry thing was not exactly my specialty. And I walked over, and Bob Aarons, who I know you guys know, Bob was there, and I signed up and I joined the radio station. And then, fast forward, right? Like the assistant sports manager, and then you become the sports manager, you're doing updates one-on-one, you're calling games. So it was the best training ground. I'd argue it's the best training ground in the country if you want to be, a sportscaster, and it's on the short list. And there's some great programs nationally. People talk about Syracuse, and I get that. And I've been on the West Coast, and I've been around and got to mentor some kids in Annenberg at USC and the Cronkite School at ASU, but my heart's always in the Bronx.
Mike, you mentioned Bob Aarons, and anyone who's been at FUV Sports the last 2 decades,
the legend.
Bob Aarons is always a popular topic of conversation, and for good reason as well. What was your experience like with Bob during your 4 years at Fordham, and how much has he meant to you in your career?
Ooh, if you say Bob Aarons to anyone who's been through the WFUV program, you immediately get the reaction that I gave you, which is a smile and a laugh, because he's as unique a person that I've ever encountered in my entire life. He also has maybe the biggest heart of anyone that I've ever worked with in this business. I can only tell you how many times we'd be in a control room and he's listening to my play-by-play or the advice that he'd be willing to give me, or my senior year when I was freaking out that I didn't have a job and my roommates all had things lined up that second semester. And he's like, in a Bob voice, you never know who's listening. You never know what's going to happen. And those types of things. I think in life, I shouldn't say everyone. I was fortunate, and I think you guys would say the same, because we had the resources, right, that were on that campus. But it's not just about the resources. You need people who care, and Bob cared. He cared about what we were doing on air. He cared about what we were doing when we weren't in the studio, when we were doing shows. So there's no way I'm in the position that I'm in right now without Bob. Just the advice, over the years, always willing to help. I can't say enough good things about Bob and what he's meant to me in my career.
Mike, you mentioned doing play-by-play at Fordham, something you still stay in the mix of now, and you started your career as a radio host, then went to TV host. How much of that versatility that we know Bob instills in his students has benefited you specifically in your career?
Whew. I would imagine, and you'd have a good sense of this, Emmanuel, just because I know you've won awards for play-by-play, and I would imagine most of the guys on the staff, they want to be play-by-play guys. Is that sort of, and I shouldn't say guys, I use that term for both genders, but the females that are also on staff, like they want to be on air. Typically, it's a lot of calling games. And, I would be honest with you. I mean, that was definitely cool. And I loved it. And I love when I get an opportunity to do some of those types of events. But, the radio work, doing one-on-one for me personally in my career was the game changer. When I graduated, so Rich McLaughlin, I don't know if you guys know Rich, but Rich was a couple years older than me at Fordham, and he had the Mets credential before I did. You talk about Bob, like, I don't know if I have my jobs if it's not for Rich, who, I get to talk with, friends on Facebook, and we message every once in a while, but, I haven't connected with him, and I probably should. And it's a good reminder after we finish up this podcast. But Rich had gotten a job at Sirius Radio at the time. We're on campus for homecoming. We're in the parking lot, hanging out, maybe playing some games and winning. And Rich says, "What are you doing?" And I said, I just got hired by the small radio station in New Jersey to do high school sports, just do some reporting. And you guys know this, right? Like, you're sending your tape. Actually, you guys don't send tapes. You send emails with links to your reels. But back in the day, there was like literally DVDs that I would put in the mail and send out to different radio stations and television stations. And Rich said, "Look, I'm at Sirius Radio. I'm doing, a lot of music." And he got hooked up because of some of the relationships from Fordham, specifically at WFUV. Rich says, "Hey, get me your stuff." All right, fast forward. I send him my tape. He gives it to the executive producer. A couple days later, I'm in for an interview, and they hire me, and I'm doing this overnight update. And then fast forward, you're hosting multiple shows. Things fell into place for me in a big way. But I say that because Rich was working on a show at the time, and I ended up doing updates on that show. Rich got so busy with music, he said, "Look, I just don't have the bandwidth to host these shows anymore." That show at the time didn't have, so we called it a host. I don't know if you guys still call that, but basically the point guard on the show. And I had done that for, 3 years, basically doing one-on-one. So I understood, what it was like to be a point guard on the show. And I love being a point guard. And, they gave me an opportunity, like one show, and no one had really said anything. And the next show came, and I just started talking when we started the show, and I wasn't just doing updates. And then fast forward, you get more and more opportunities. But it was great. That versatility, I always tell people this: if you can do radio, you can do television. If you can do TV, that doesn't mean you can do radio. And I think the ability to host those radio shows when I was in college was the game changer for me, because I understood transitions, whether I knew that it was a transition or how to host or those skills. I'm not sure if I was fully aware of, some of the formatics of it and what those movements were kind of called. I say movements like I'm an actual basketball player or something, but things that you're doing that you're not even aware of, right? Because you guys are listening back to your shows, and I would do that as well, and just kind of critique myself. And hey, did that sound smooth? Did it not sound smooth? How do I get to point A to point B? How do I have a conversation with someone? Like, we're talking here, guys, and I used to have a set of questions when I would do one-on-one, but as I got older, I got more comfortable with the refs, where I'd have an idea of where I wanted to go, but it was about listening and following up on some of those things. So that skill helped me big time when I got to NBA TV, and then when I got to ESPN, and then certainly, almost the last 10 years at Pac-12 Network. It got to the point at Pac-12 where, we just, last couple of years, just, I won't use prompter, because I want the conversations that are happening in our green room, or was happening, because I don't work there anymore. It's still a little fresh and raw, guys. Like you get to that point where it's like, hey, the conversations that we're having in the green room with our analysts, like, that's what I wanted on our set. So it was more important to me to listen to them while we were watching the games and prompt them and sort of bookmark some of the things that we were discussing, and then just do it on set for everyone who was watching.
Mike, kind of bouncing around with your career a little bit, you worked at ESPN. You were an anchor there for about 4 years, like you mentioned.
Sure.
When everyone thinks of the sports media industry, the worldwide leader in sports always come up in ESPN. What was it like working there? Do you remember your first day working there?
Oh, hell yeah. Are you kidding me, man? It's ESPN. Do I remember? I could tell you everything about my audition as well beforehand. It's really wild. You're right. It's the worldwide leader. It's these great opportunities. And, Jackson, I'd be lying if I told you that that experience, man, like, that was that's made my career. There's no other place on the planet that you get the reps that you get there. There's no place to go but up and get better. So I'll give you a great example. About a year after I had gotten hired, so I was working, ESPN news shifts, a little bit of Sports Center. I would do some basketball shows, some NBA shows. So you're doing a little bit of everything. But it was the first time I was doing television full time. Like NBA TV, I was a freelancer, and during the NBA season, I was working a ton, but it wasn't the same as ESPN. So you might go, 5 days of your work week, and you're doing 3-hour shows, 3-hour shifts on ESPN News, or a 3-hour Sports Center on television. You only can get better. And I was there for a year. I didn't fully unpack. And about a year after I was living in West Hartford, which is really close to Bristol in the studios, I'm unpacking a box and I see a DVD, and it's a copy of my reel. So I throw it into the DVD player, and Jackson, I couldn't believe the place even hired me. I couldn't get over how bad I was in this reel. And it's just this growth. And you guys probably have seen it in your careers. Like if you listen back when you're putting together your radio reel, your senior year, like I always tell a lot of folks, like, hey, just pile it up. Like, I don't know what system you use, but basically have that timeline. And as you get something better, you take something off and you put it back in, but you always have those files handy. And, you're not using stuff from your sophomore year, on your reel when you graduate, because you're going to get better as time goes on. But those days at ESPN, those hours, the friendships that I made, it was awesome. But you're put in situations that you just won't be put in at any other network. And I won't say a training ground, but because at that point it's big time. But at that point, like, you're just expected to be able to execute on those shows. And then you leave and you go someplace else. And there was nothing at Pac-12 Network that was going to happen on that set that I hadn't experienced before. Hey, prompter goes down. All right, whatever. Like, no big deal. Like, you're just rocking and rolling. Hey, my audition at Pac-12 Network, I think part of the reason why I got the job, I had to read a highlight. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the shot sheet, but basically if you're doing, a sports show, they give you a shot sheet that's got the situation, description of the play, and the result. And typically if you're doing Sports Center, you're probably doing, a 3-play, 45 seconds, 30 seconds, the big game, minute and a half. A Super Bowl highlight might be, 3 minutes or something like that. They gave me a highlight and a shot sheet. The damn thing was over 5 minutes long. And I mean, I had stuff, they told me what the game was going to be. So I had pages and pages on a notepad of notes. I had something ready for like every single play. But I'm working with 2 analysts, Glenn Parker at the time, who was in on my audition, and Curtis Conway, 2 guys that I've become great friends with. And we finished the A block of the audition, and I turn around and Glenn says to me, he's like, hey, I don't want to jinx anything for you, but I just want to let you know, the guys who've auditioned, you're the only one who didn't have to stop down. Thinking to myself, oh. But that goes back to, hey, I know how to call something off of a shot sheet, even if it is 5 minutes and I'm working with an analyst and it's easy to get lost. So the longest answer to your question, which I didn't even answer about my first day at ESPN in that first show, but yes, I remember everything about it. Steve Berthiaume, who is now the voice of the Diamondbacks, his wife, Cindy Brunson, has been amazing to me over the years. But I worked with Steve. They hook you up there when you first start, or at least they used to, where they'd give you a vet who could show you the ropes a little bit. And Steve was great. Dari Noka was amazing. Steve Bunin certainly comes to mind. One of my best friends on the planet, Kevin Connors, who not only helped me professionally, but a couple years older, we were, well, he's married now and he's got 2 kids, but we would hang out, and like that helped my transition, on a personal level when I was in Connecticut. So many great things, so many great memories, and I'm going to shut up and let you guys ask another question.
You mentioned how it's much easier to nail down TV once you're familiar with radio, but going from a radio job to a TV job can present its set of challenges. What was that like, going from a host at Sirius to a host at ESPN, and that process in the days leading up?
The transition was helped, Emmanuel, because I was double dipping. I was working at Sirius Radio at the time and NBA TV. And the only reason why I got the NBA TV job was because I was doing NBA radio. And at the time, this was before Turner had taken over NBA TV. They were based in Secaucus, and the league ran the network in New Jersey. So they would use guys like Bruce Beck, Gary Apple, who I think, the audience, whoever's listening to this podcast, probably Northeast, and Bruce I used to intern for Bruce. And Gary, actually, you want to hear a crazy story. Gary, I never worked with professionally, other than we would sometimes swap spots at NBA TV. Like he would host a show and then I would host the show after, but we didn't have a ton of crossover. When I lost my gig and my contract wasn't renewed, Gary reaches out and he's like, hey, give me a call. And like, he gives me like the best pep talk in the history, give me a great pep talk. And he didn't have to give me a pep talk because it wasn't like, it was Bruce, right? Who I was his intern, and Fran Charles, who's at MLB Network. Like we didn't even have like this solidified friendship, but it goes to show you just, good people willing to help, just people who are a little bit down. But it was awesome. Like that transition, like they gave me a shot to audition because Gary and Bruce Beck and some of the other anchors were in Torino for the Olympics because, Olympic time, a lot of the local affiliates in New York, that's certainly going to happen. They send their sports people there. So they needed someone to do the fantasy show. And I had played fantasy when I was in high school in New Jersey at Burton Catholic and realgm.com. It was on NBA.com's website, and it was like a link there. And so I understood it. And, Emmanuel, I basically like did radio shows on television. I didn't really know what the hell I was doing at the time. And that helped because when I got to ESPN, I wasn't coming from a local television background where I would do 3 minutes of sports and then they were asking me to do 3 minutes of sports or 3 hours of Sports Center. So the volume I understood, and because I went from doing 6 hours of radio, hop from Midtown Manhattan, get into the car, drive to Secaucus, and I would do TV all night. So I understood what it was like to be in those situations. So the adjustment for me wasn't as hard because I understood volume, and then you get to Pac-12 and there's volume there because of the long days, and hopefully there's more of that at NFL Network for me.
Mike, just from hearing you in your career and now these 20-30 minutes, I could tell you like telling stories. And I want to go back to your time at Fordham. Is there a specific road trip or story of your time there, whether it be with Bob, that really sticks out amongst the rest?
Have you guys had Bogish on the show yet?
Not yet, but Bogish, of course, a Fordham staple.
You got to get Drew on the show. So Drew's a year older than me, of course. And God, there's so many good stories now that I'm thinking about it. I got like Spiro in my head, Tony Reality, and those guys. Tony actually was a senior in my freshman year. He was the sports manager, and you didn't have to talk to freshmen, like you know who the hell I was. And my first meeting, Tony comes up to me and he's like, "Hey, I'm and it's of course Tony, who's still got the bravado he's got now. He had that when he was in school and this great aura, but he introduced himself so welcoming. That goes back to that community of guys from FUV, which is awesome. But one trip in particular, I'll never forget this. So Drew and I, he's calling games. I'm his analyst. We had a men's and women's basketball trip to St. Bonaventure. Oh my God. So we had to stay there a couple extra days because they didn't want to have us go back and forth. So it made sense. So Drew and I, what's the hotel? You probably stay at the same darn hotel that we stayed at. I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's Motel 6 or whatever the place is. And I'll never forget this. In fact, it actually popped up because I think Mike Watts had just tweeted Drew about this, and it like a Smush Parker highlight came up. Guys, when I tell you, first of all, Smush was awesome as a basketball player. We're up in Olean, New York. Smush gave us the best dunk I had ever seen in person before. Okay, he's coming down the line or coming down, from midcourt. Finds a second gear. Dude takes off from one step inside the free throw line. I swear to God, guys, when you're watching this live, it will look like Smush is just continuing to rise. I swear he looked down at 3 defenders in the paint, was like, yo, whatever. Turns around, reverse dunks on these dudes. Now, for anyone who doesn't know about St. Bonaventure, they got the monks up there, right? That's the religious order. They got foul mouths, man. They are cursing during games. It's stuff that you just wouldn't expect, religious dudes to do. They're doing that up there. The crowd is crazy. If you haven't been up there, their arena, it's straight up are the stands. Everyone's going nuts. You could have heard a damn pin drop after Smush dunked on these 3 dudes. He gets fouled, missed the free throw, besides the point, but it was still awesome. But all those road trips, guys, I remember, you guys, I don't know if you know Mike Ratty or not, we would get into these massive debates, right? You'd be in a room, it's not like we all had our own rooms, right? So you're all sharing rooms.
Yep.
And just the debates, middle of the night, I remember Mike telling us Paul Pierce is like the greatest Celtic of all time. And it's just like, just these crazy sports debates that were going down. But that goes to like show you like that, those friendships, man. Like Mike actually just reached out to me, the other day. Drew and I still talk. Drew's still one of my close friends. And I couldn't be happier for him and his success that he's been able to do now at CBS. And it's awesome. I miss those days, but those friendships, I mean, you guys know, like you guys are both in Long Island. You both live 5 minutes from each other. You guys are going to be lifelong friends, whether you know it or not. Like my friends from college and my roommates, and we had a text thread that is, I mean, it is unbelievable the stuff that gets said on these text threads with my old roommates from college and certainly the guys from FUV. So I'm jealous because if I could flash back, you mentioned 2003. It's like, damn, I used to have a good time back then. Times have certainly changed a little bit. So, but enjoy those moments.
Mike, want to leave you with this because you obviously have such a captivating story. You authored a piece back in February, how an undocumented immigrant may be the luckiest sportscaster in the world. Can you kind of elaborate on how much your family and your story, how much of an impact that's had on your career?
Yeah. There was a time, guys, especially because we talked about my time at ESPN, where it was stick to sports, right? Like you didn't see. Now we're in a climate where there's current athletes that are playing that have, messages about social justice on their jerseys and their helmets and their uniforms and on the courts and the whole thing, which is amazing. But there was a time when that just wasn't, you didn't do that stuff and you didn't talk politics when you were on air. And, about a year or so ago, guys, I'm watching the news and I'm just seeing all these stories about these kids that are undocumented with their parents getting separated. And it was breaking my heart. Like it's like a pretty messed up thing. And I'll use cleaner language because I know it's a podcast and I don't want to be inappropriate. But my God, it was like crushing me to see that. And like even now, I mean, you're watching these debates, or obviously Biden won, but like during the debates, I mean, it's like, what was it, like 500 kids that they can't even find their parents? Like that was killing me, man. And at that point, I don't really know exactly what had happened, but kind of internally, but I just sort of said to myself, like, my God, like I don't know if I have the opportunities that I have right now had it not been for my grandfather, who was undocumented and from Hong Kong, and basically got a job as a sailor. And, when the ship was docking in Baltimore, didn't get back on the ship. And, there's like a real struggle. He wasn't with, my dad and my aunts and uncles, when they were in Hong Kong. He would send money back there. And then eventually he saved up enough where he was able to bring them to the States. And like, that's not even easy. Like, I wish I could tell you that, my dad and my aunts and uncles had this great storybook ending where, all of a sudden it's like, oh, hey, we're going to the United States and it's all going to be good. It's like, no, man, like there was a language issue. There was, teachers that weren't supportive. My dad, I don't think had, certainly didn't have the resources. He wasn't worried about, the Little League game that I got to go and play and the swim meets that I got to go and do. And of course I got to go to Fordham with great resources at FUV. Like that wasn't his path, and it wasn't the path of my aunts and uncles. But I see like me and my cousins and some of the sacrifices that, my grandparents and certainly my dad and my aunts and uncles were able to make. And I just think to myself, like, my God, like how lucky am I to be in this situation? And yet that segment of the population had been vilified for a few years. Undocumented immigrants, like they're not bad people. Like that's just not, there are some, like I'm not denying that, but there's, people that don't have what we have here in the States and are in desperate situations, trying to escape poverty, safety issues as well for them. And, to be honest with you, I just kind of wanted to humanize the story because I just think it's way easy to watch news coverage and say, oh, these people are really bad and they're criminals. It's like, no, that's not accurate. That's not everyone. There's bad people, and there's bad people, by the way, that are that are not undocumented immigrants. I mean, we've seen that as well. So I just think you got to take every case individually. And I just know how fortunate I've been in my career, certainly, but just in life. I mean, my God, like you guys, you probably don't even realize how lucky you are just to be at Fordham. I mean, just you walk that campus, and maybe you have an appreciation because you guys are doing virtual learning right now. But, every time I've had an opportunity to be back on that campus and head down to Pugsley's and get, a chicken roll, my God, I miss those days. Like it brings a smile to my face. And those were some of the best years of my life.
Mike, appreciate a few minutes. Congrats again,
sure.
and thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, you guys rock, man. I appreciate the invite. I always get excited when I see the episodes post on my timeline on Twitter. So keep rocking it, and seriously, like, best of luck to both of you guys moving on in your careers.
Appreciate that, Mike. Thank you.